This is it. So welcome everybody. This is episode 18 of Storycomic Presents, and we have with us here. We're excited to be talking to Mya Gosling, the professional artist and author of 3 comics, the highly acclaimed and famous Shakespearean webcomic, Good Tickle Brain.
Possibly,
yeah. See, and that's basically your masthead title. That's like the main title. You also are the artist and writer of Sketchy Beta, which is a comic that documents your rock climbing experience. The artist and also co-author of Keep Calm and Muslim, which is a mostly lighthearted look at life as a Muslim American. And just really honored and grateful to have Mya here with us. So thank you very much for joining us, Mya.
Thanks. This is a lot of fun. I'm excited to have a chat.
Yeah. So as I say, a lot of the stuff that we talk about here is for people that are writers and artists and people that want to learn more about the medium. And so what we want to do first for people who might not be extremely familiar with goodticklebrain.com, which is your website. Do you want to give people just a brief background and history of how you got into comics?
Yeah, sure. So I never set out to draw comics, and I have absolutely no background in comics or art whatsoever. What kind of happened is a roundabout way is when I'll be traveling with my family on vacation, and as a way to keep everybody entertained while waiting for dinner to arrive, we'd pass a sketchbook around, and we'd all draw something documenting something fun that had happened that day. And I couldn't draw, or at least that was my opinion, so I would end up drawing little stick figure sort of cartoons of funny things that happened with dialogue and everything like that. So I just got kind of used to documenting funny events through stick figures. Flash forward to 2013, I just got back from an annual family trip to the Stratford Festival up in Canada, which is I think the largest repertory theater festival in North America, specializes in Shakespeare, does a lot of other stuff. And I ended up drawing some comics based on that trip and just posted them on Facebook. And eventually one of my friends was like, you should just set up a website and post them there. So I did. And 7 years later, that's what I'm doing. Pretty much more or less full time. It's Good Tickle Brain is my main comic, which deals with everything Shakespeare. And then, as you mentioned, I've got these 2 spin-off comics, Sketchy Beta and Keep Calm and Muslim, and it's just been keeping me busy ever since.
And so you actually, before you were a library cataloger, and you actually this is your full-time job. You are now a full-time webcomic.
I'm certainly trying to be, yes.
And so also, part of it, give us a little bit of also is your inspiration of, I know a lot of people have talked to you about the Shakespeare and the Good Tickle Brain piece of it. Explain to us a little bit too about what made you decide to then start to diversify your catalog, well, as a little library term, of doing different titles as well.
It's interesting because when I started Good Tickle Brain, I was expecting maybe to have 50% Shakespeare comic content, because I think Shakespeare's a lot of fun. It's a lot more fun than people give him credit for. Can be really silly and entertaining. So I was expecting I'd do half Shakespeare comics and then just half other comics drawn from my life or other experiences and anything. But the reaction to the Shakespeare stuff was so strong. I said, okay, well, this is clearly what people are interested in. I'm just going to do Shakespeare, which is fine with me. I love it. But I also love documenting everything else about life and Shakespeare. You mentioned that I was a library cataloger for a while. In my office, I actually had a whiteboard, which I propped up on my desk. And every day I would draw a comic on this whiteboard documenting some silly thing that had happened in the office during the day. And so just this idea of documenting everyday things and making them into something fun always appealed to me. So that's where the other comics sort of came out, was to give me a non-Shakespeare outlet to be able to play around with these other things. The Keep Calm and Muslim, I started that after the 2016 election because I felt that we just needed some positive voices out there to counteract a lot of the negativity, a lot of the xenophobia that was sort of rising at that time. So I was really happy. I reached out to my friends who are Muslims and asked them if they'd be willing to collaborate with me on this. I was really happy that they agreed. And so it's just been a lot of fun to talk with them and get their stories and just document them. And then same thing with rock climbing. That's, well, not at the moment, but like I'm always at the rock climbing gym, and that's where I spend a great deal of my life. And, as with any sort of subculture, incredibly silly things happen when you're a rock climber. And I just wanted to capture that and document that and share that sort of fun, off-kilter look at daily experience. So that's where the sort of the branching out from Shakespeare came from.
Right. And you and I know you've always, I mean, listened to your previous article, interviews and reading some of the previous articles that people have done with you. You've always kind of said that, I've never been an artist, and I've never been, but honestly, when I look at your previous work and look at your new work, you can tell there is a level of professionalism that have emerged from it. Do you feel as though that there's a level of audience expectation that you are that they've kind of pinholed you into doing the stick figure stuff? Or have you ever thought about doing something along the lines like Bill Watterson from Calvin and Hobbes, where maybe one thing will be a little bit more detailed or anything like that? Or
yeah, well, I think I once had a graduate student email me for their PhD dissertation, and they asked me, like, why did you choose stick figures? And I mean, the basic answer is that's all I could figure out how to draw. I've moved along from the sort of I'm not an artist, what am I even doing thing to being like, I'm a pretty good stick figure artist. But that really is sort of like the limitations of my artistic talent at this moment. And as you mentioned, like my style has definitely evolved somewhat over the last 7 years. But whenever I try and stretch myself beyond stick figures, I would need to really work at developing a broader range. So I definitely don't feel like my audience is pigeonholing me. I just feel like that's where my current capabilities are sticking me.
So you don't feel like outside pressure to keep with that. Okay. And so when you mentioned the keep calm and Muslim thing, so from a technical perspective, and for people that are listening that are the artists or writers, what are the challenges, like the technical challenges of, I want to say, like ownership and direction to that comic strip between you and your friends that you collaborate with?
Sort of when I set it up, I wanted to set it up in a way that would not, because it was my idea. It's like, I want to do this comic on your experiences, but I don't want to put any sort of extra burden or expectation on you. So both my friends that I'm currently co-authoring this comic with, they're both quite active on Facebook, and they would post regular updates from their life on things that happened on Facebook. So I asked them, can I just trawl through your Facebook history and pick out funny posts and turn them into comics? And they're like, yeah, go for it. So the process is I'll scroll through their Facebook history, find a post that is funny or illuminating or thought-provoking, and I will then take that and turn it into a comic. So I will tweak the dialogue if necessary, although oftentimes I just lift it, because they're both excellent writers. I just lift it from their post, and then I'll decide how to paste that out into a comic strip form, and then I'll draw it, and then I send it to them for review, and they either give me a thumbs up or ask me to tweak something. So I do deliberately to try and not make them be like, hey, give me a comic script by this date and then I'll draw it. It's more sort of like I'm drawing inspiration from what they're posting, taking their words, illustrating it, and then running it past them to make sure I'm not misrepresenting them horribly or something like that. And then sometimes they'll have their own separate idea and they'll message me and be like, oh, can we do a comic about this? Can we do a comic about that? And then we'll sort of go through that. So
it does remind me of the point of the dreaded webcomic buffer. So do you have enough, like, for your audience members that your readers that look forward to that your Keep Calm and Muslim on sketch. Are you in making sure that, as you say, you don't really push them a lot, but do you want to make sure you also have enough details to kind of give yourself that buffer of weeks in advance as well?
Yeah, so I mean, ideally, I would have several weeks in advance. It has been at some points. I am like on a Friday night trying to put together a comic for Saturday because that's life. But they have such a wealth of past material to go through that I've gone through their Facebook feed and just kind of like copied and pasted a bunch of interesting stories that they posted. So I just have this file of all the stories, which I can then work through at my own pace and then send them off to them to check when I'm done. So keeping ahead of the entirely self-imposed deadline is definitely an issue, but it hasn't been for Keep Calm and Muslim. That's entirely my deadline problems and not theirs.
Okay, so they gave you have enough. You have enough.
Yeah, I mean, info. I've got years of material from them that I can use. It's great.
Okay, and did you feel as though when you did when you did Sketchy Beta and working on Keep Calm and Muslim on, did you was it a decision in advance, or was it just natural that you decided to follow the same three panel format that you did with Good Tickle Brain?
Well, Sketchy Beta is 4-panel format.
Okay.
Because that's the one that's formatted for Instagram. So this is the great sort of trying to figure out your medium thing. Is like Good Tickle Brain is not active on Instagram. I haven't quite figured out how to make Good Tickle Brain work on Instagram. Sketchy Beta, I deliberately, when I started it, I was like, you know what? All the climbers, they're not on Twitter. They're not really on Facebook. They're all on Instagram. Climbers are all on Instagram. So I was like, I'm going to format this so that it's easy to share on Instagram. So it's set up with 4 panels and a nice little square that shares easily on Instagram. So my other comics are all more like, newspaper format landscape, and they're harder to share on Instagram. And I haven't quite streamlined that. If I was doing everything over again, would I have started out with square as a basis? Maybe, just because that's how a lot of webcomic artists share their stuff now. But it is what it is, and I'm sort of not stuck in the formats that I've chosen for each of them, but I've sort of settled into each sort of format now. So, right. But yeah, that's the secret behind that format.
No, and you self-published your books. You have your Good Tickle Brain in books forms.
Yeah, I've printed from a local printing company. I've collected some of my comics in just comic book form, and just print these locally. And I've been selling them online and to theaters and at local comic festivals for a couple of years now.
So what was the aspects of putting that together? So talk us through a bit the formatting piece and the technical perspectives. Is at what point, because these were web comics, but what did you do with them at, like, say, right at the beginning? Do you draw them out, or you do them digitally, scanning? How does that work for you? What's your process?
So when I started, I was originally drawing them out on paper, cleaning them up, scanning them, editing them nicely. And then about, 4 years ago, I started drawing digitally. So now all my stuff is done digitally. I have a Surface Pro, and I use Clip Studio Paint, which is a program that's specifically created for comic creators. I think it used to be called manga something, so it was specifically Manga Studio. So it was specifically done for manga, and it has like all sorts of really awesome features of like perspective and fancy special effects, none of which I use. I use maybe 10% of it. It's criminal how much of the capability I don't take advantage of. But so now all my comics are drawn digitally in that platform, which some people have told me they like sort of the sketchy imperfectness of comics drawn by hand, but it's much quicker to do it digitally for me. And also I like the cleanliness of it. I feel like that works very well with the stick figures. I would always get irritated when I was drawing with pencil and paper, because I have no art background. So I was kind of making it up on like, what kind of pens am I using? What kind of paper am I using? How do I clean this up in Photoshop? I don't know how to use it. So I was always a bit dissatisfied with like the unevenness of the lines, and everything just looked kind of scratchy. So I'm currently really enjoying drawing digitally.
And what did you do? And how did you put it together in the book then too? Are those something through? You said those through a local printer. You haven't done
Yeah,
those like an online self-publishing tool or anything?
yeah, it's a local printer, Greco Publishing. It's based in Plymouth, Michigan, which is just down the road from me. And they when I went to they were recommended to me actually at one of the local comic festivals that I exhibited at. One of the other exhibitors told me that this was the printer that she used. So I went and checked them out, and they have templates on their site. And I think now they actually have a tool that you can use to assemble your comic book like through the website, but they just had the templates of, this is this size comic, this is that size comic. So I just downloaded the templates and then edited my artwork to fit them into like a whole bunch of JPEG files, uploaded them and send them a link, and then they print them very nicely.
Oh, wow.
So it's pretty simple.
No, did you, because I know a few people we've talked to made this mistake when they first took their webcomics and then placed it in and decided to print them out, that webcomics are in 72 DPI, but then printing is like 300 DPI. Did you have any challenges of any of the were you able to have the foresight of to making sure that the images were sharp enough when you put them on print?
Yeah, certainly. Since I've been drawing digitally, I draw all my comics at 600 DPI.
Oh, okay.
So I went kind of like off the other end of the spectrum. Being like, what if someone needs to print this out really big to put on the side of a house? So yeah, all my original files, all my working files are in 600 DPI. So it was pretty easy to just get them down to 300 DPI. And actually, that was one of the things, is my files were so big and my computer is not that fast, so it would take a long time to like shrink it down and everything. But yeah, so the resolution, it's definitely something to watch out for, is if you're digitally creating webcomic art, create it at a nice high resolution, because it just gives you so much more flexibility if you end up printing it or anything.
Right. And talk to us a bit about also with, because everything comes down to it, even as learning as you go, is what were some of the more challenging parts about when you decided to jump in and actually start doing this? What were some of the parts that you found that came easy to you, and what were some of the things that you really had to dig down and really have to teach yourself?
I mean, basically all of it has been everything apart from just like coming up with ideas is I've been making it up as I go along. Right. I had no idea about like, how do I scan a paper comic and edit it in Photoshop, and then like, where do I even put it? How do I get a website? How does hosting work? All this stuff. I just kind of muddled through it from the first several months and had no idea. And then you got into, well, gosh, I probably should get one of this Twitter account things and like be on social media. It's like, how do I do that? I wasn't on Twitter before. So then I had to do that. And then just, I should set up an email newsletter for people to sign up to. So it's just like every single step of the way, you're like, oh, this is a thing that this is an opportunity. I have no idea how to take advantage of it. I guess I better learn. So it's just every step of the way has been a learning experience, and just kind of, I often feel like I'm just kind of muddling through and don't really know what I'm doing, but it all accumulates, and eventually you can sort of do a good impression of a competent person.
And what I love about your work too is that even like the fonts fit your style. How much is that a font that you made, or is that something that you're able to find someplace?
Yeah, so I originally hand lettered my comics, but my handwriting is pretty terrible and inconsistent. But then I discovered there's like lots of places online where you can create your own custom fonts. I can't remember which website I used for this one, but you basically go there, you print out a grid, and on the grid they have like capital A, lowercase a, and then you write everything out in your own handwriting, scan it in, and then it automatically turns it into a font. So the font I use is actually my own handwriting, but much neater. Done very deliberately one time, and now I can just use it in all my comics. So yeah, that's my own handwriting.
And you did bring up earlier about your website, because I did see that you have a pretty substantial following on Twitter as well and Instagram. Did you?
Um,
And it gets down to what you're talking about earlier, is that your work is very niche, but in a way, the niche stuff is where are the things that people kind of gravitate towards as well.
yeah, I didn't really set out to be super niche. I was just sort of drawing about things that amused me personally, and apparently I'm just like weird and niche. Um, so, but then, yeah, like I said with the Shakespeare comics, like people instantly responded to them very strongly. It's like, oh, there isn't something like this in the Shakespeare world. There isn't someone doing like lighthearted, fun, educational comics about Shakespeare. I guess I'll do more of them. And so with the Muslim comics and rock climbing comics, there actually are a couple other comics on those topics, both of which have massively huge, much more followers than I do. The Muslim one is Yes, I'm Hot in This, which is a hijabi in her headscarf being like, yes, I'm hot in this. It's a great follow. And then rock climbing has like Beta Monkeys and some other ones. But so those areas already had pre-existing comics with large followings, but not many. So like you look at webcomics about video gamers, there's like a billion of them, right? And which is not to dump on webcomics about video gamers, but it's a very big market. There's like a lot of people doing comics on similar topics. So you have a big choice of them. But if you're a rock climber and you want to look at a webcomic, it's probably can count them on one hand. It's not a lot out there. So that definitely wasn't like a marketing strategy. But I would say if you're like trying to come up with your own comic idea, like think about things that haven't been explored. Like, it's really the sort of the frontiers. Like what weird thing that I love doesn't have this sort of content or community out there. It's like, could I do something to fill that gap? So that's been really fun. And, there might be other things that come up. I had lots of librarians tell me I should do more library specific comics. I had like comics on these very esoteric cataloging protocols that only catalogers would get. And I've had librarians be like, oh, you should do, put those together in a book and something. I'm like, okay, I've only got so much space for really niche comics. Maybe the library cataloging system comic is going to have to wait till later. But yeah, it's a lot of fun trying to, coming up with these ideas and be like, oh, well, there's nothing out there. I guess I'll do it. So.
But yeah, you're like that, like you brought up that point, is that it's important to do things that mean something to you, and you'll find your family in a way, like once you find that. And I noticed too is like you can kind of split it up into two separate genres of like life experiences and passions, and I noticed that you kind of have both going on here, where you have your life experience piece and then some of the things that you're passionate about. With that said, you kind of mentioned the library piece. Do you have like a wish list on your wall of like, this is my to-do list of I want to do this someday, I want to do this someday as well? I've
got a list in my notebook of projects that I want to work on that sort of extend beyond what I'm currently working on, but I actually try not to brainstorm too much because my plate is pretty full at the moment. And I get easily overwhelmed with just the amount of content I'm churning out. Because I also do a whole bunch of autobiographical comics, a lot of which are about me personally and like the creative process, which I post to Patreon for some of the people who support me on Patreon. So, I end up drawing like 5 comics a week, and it's a lot to keep a handle on. So I do have a list of other projects that other topics and things I would like to explore, but I try not to think about it too much because it'll get out of hand.
And you do mention Patreon, and for people that are Patreon followers, please definitely check out Mya's Patreon link. And right here, I'm looking at your tiers. You got some pretty good tiers. You got, and it looks like it's pretty active. How did you come up with these tiers, and what the levels, and what some of the benefits of each tier? Because it looks like it's actually
Just kind of
Pretty
made
good.
it up as I went along.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I mean, so when I was setting up Patreon, I spent a lot of time sort of thinking about it. And Patreon is crowdfunding website where you can subscribe to creators and pledge a certain amount every month to help them continue creating. And so when I set mine up, I was like, okay, how many tiers and we should have? And so I just kind of set up arbitrary numbers: $1, $3, $5, $10. And I haven't been posting very much at the $1 level. I'm sorry. I love you, my $1 patrons. I really, really do. It's a lot of content. But yeah, it was just sort of like I wanted to give the people who are supporting me something back. Sort of like, so the comics that I post at the $5 level are the ones of, there's a theme. It's usually me freaking out about all the work I have to do. There's a lot of comics exploring that, but it's sort of like a peek into my life and like what I'm dealing with. And then at the $10 level on the website there, it has, it's advertising a video of me live drawing. Recently, I've started posting sort of outtake comics, like comics that I would like to put on my website, but I thought were a little bit too weird or too in-jokey. So I've been sort of like test driving those with my $10 patrons. So it's a lot of fun, sort of, because it gives me sort of a small community of people that I can try out these other comics with and sort of have a good time and then thank them for supporting me. So it's a fun space, and I've enjoyed creating stuff for those people.
And what is, so it's patreon.com/ what's the
Good Tickle Brain. Patreon.com/Good Tickle Brain.
Good Tickle Brain. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And as I say, and you got a really robust group of people, like a really good, robust group of patrons as well on there.
They've been great. Yeah. No, it's been really lucky to have that kind of support network and just like people who believe. The thing with Patreon is it's very sort of helpful, not helpful, but like it's not quite inspiring, but it's like to know that people believe in your work enough that they're willing to like pony up money.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, oh, what I'm doing does have value. Like it's maybe a value beyond or not necessarily limited to a dollar amount, but it's like, oh, these people actually really appreciate what I'm doing, which I think is really important, because I think a lot of webcomic artists, we operate in a vacuum, right? It's just us and the piece of paper and like ideas, and you put it out there and you get a certain number of likes and stuff like that, but it's hard. You don't get like a face-to-face interaction with people saying, oh, I thought this was great, etc., etc. And so Patreon is one of the ways that you can develop a community of people and have that sort of feeling. It's like, okay, this is a community. I recognize all these names. These people post on my when I do preview comics on Patreon, they'll post and comment and stuff like that. And it's just this nice sort of extra level of community that as a solitary webcomic artist, you really learn to appreciate.
Right. And that's the thing. And as you say, I think community is the key word to that. And community isn't a physical location. Community is a place where you belong, a place where you feel welcome and comfortable. And that's what you said, like that with Patreon, it does give you that, it does create that environment of, here's my safe space. This is where people are here to, where we can connect and talk about what we like and what we have in common. And the benefit of having that Patreon page is that this is, and it's a great place to get feedback too. Do you ever, for your higher level patrons, is there like feedback or things that you get from them a lot? Or
I've had some people comment, be like, oh, I'd love to see this, or that would be really cool to see, and I sort of like file them away in my list of ideas. I'd like to do some more direct solicitation of people being like, okay, I finished this comic project, like what sort of things would you like to see from me in the future? And just so being able to have that sort of interaction is really cool.
And so what made you decide to we talked about the Keep Calm and Musliman. And as you said, you have a few ideas in your head that you always want to do, like you brought the library piece. What made you decide, what made you decide to say, I want to do Sketchy, but I want to do the rock climbing piece? And still have a weekly updates with that? what part of that passion you have in life or life experiences that you kind of singled in on and said, let's do a comic about this?
Well, Sketchy Beta, it was just like purely self-indulgent, self-entertaining. Because before the pandemic, I would spend, several hours every week at the climbing gym with my climbing friends and just having a good time. And then, fun things would happen, and I'd be like, oh, I gotta make this into a comic. So originally, I did them, and I'd like stick them up on the bulletin board at the gym, and then people would see them and stuff like that. And it's like, I want to make this more official, and I want to actually turn this into something that I can share with climbers who aren't just at my local gym. So that's how that came about. But that one is probably, of my three main comics, that's definitely the most self-indulgent, because that's just like, it's just things that I find funny about climbing, and the fact that other people find them funny is just like added bonus. It's purely to entertain myself, really.
Well, and you do have some, as they say, like, humor and tragedy in a way. Is like, I love reading some of the ones you post about, like the post-COVID, where doing Zoom yoga and checking your temperature before you climb the wall and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think all my autobiographical comics are all various forms of self-therapy. The ones I post on Patreon are all about creative angst and, being overwhelmed and not being able, having writer's block and stuff like that. And, I'll take a day when I'm feeling just really, really terrible. I'm like, I can't do anything. I can't draw anything. Nothing's working. And I'm like, okay, I'm super down, totally unmotivated. I'm just going to turn it into a comic about how much I suck. And then you draw the comic, and because it's a comic, it naturally comes out being funny somehow. And then you just look at it, and you're like, oh, okay, that's not too bad. And it's definitely like a form of self-therapy. And with the climbing ones, I'm missing climbing like crazy. Like, that was my social life and my physical exercise all rolled into one. And it's just, I've missed not going climbing so much. And doing all these COVID-themed climbing comics about, like, oh, how are you going to go to a gym and touch these holes on the wall that tons of other people are touching, just like exploring that with a sense of humor. Right. Makes it much easier for me to be like, okay, this is how it is. It's horrible, but also there is some humor to be found in it. And I mean, I feel like a lot of that comes through in the Shakespeare. I think I might say about my Shakespeare comics is the tragedies are always so much easier to work with than the comedies. So like, it's really easy to make Hamlet funny because it's just, I don't know, it's so tragic that it's funny. But you take one of the comedies like Midsummer Night's Dream, and I had to work a lot harder to try and draw comics of that. So I think the link between tragedy and comedy is, the lines are very blurred, and oftentimes really hard things are a lot easier to turn into something funny just by juxtaposition.
And I remember you said in a previous interview that the tragedies are easier to draw because it's easier to have the beginning, middle, and end in those three panels as compared to, as you said, to the comedies as well.
Yeah, I mean, the tragedies in Shakespeare are really, I do these 3-panel plays where I sum up the entire play in 3 panels, and the tragedies are super easy because, like, it starts off with a problem, and then the problem gets worse, and then everybody dies at the end. And it's really easy. And then the comedies are all, like, super convoluted, and people falling in love in disguises, and then, like, 8 people get married at the end, but also, a god manifested itself. And they're really complicated, and it's super hard. But, like, the tragedies are just, like, people made terrible mistakes, and they all end up dead. And it's really simple.
Yeah. Like you said, made a mistake, made it worse, then died.
Yeah, that's Shakespeare for you.
Yeah. And I gotta highlight too is that it's, I'm having some small epiphanies as we're talking, is that like the two main characteristics of cartoonists is drawing for therapy, and then the other point, which I think is the benefit of being a cartoonist, and I would say the tragedy of being a cartoonist, is that you're constantly looking at every part of your life as, oh, this would make a good comic. Like,
yeah, it's that definitely happens. Like today, for instance, I was out running an errand, and there's a whole bunch of circumstances, and I had just texted one of my friends this long message about, I'm going to get my life in order, and I'm going to use this system and organize things this way. And then like the next text message my friend received was, and my car is dead because my battery died. And he texted me back and was like, your life is just one long comic. And he's right. It's you're constantly thinking about comic ideas. If you think about it, you can just turn like just about any part of your daily experience into a comic. So yeah, you're constantly surrounded by ideas, and sometimes it's like, can I just focus on the one thing that I have to do now and not do these fun stuff? But yeah, it's a fun challenge to have.
Well, and you did mention that. Let me touch on that point you said. Have you ever thought about doing long form comics?
Like, are you talking fictional long form comics, like, or just
autobiographical instead of having being in a 4 or 3 panel situation, doing something where it's just a continuous long graphic novel setup?
I've thought about it. It's kind of on my long, projects that I possibly someday will get to at some point list, because there are definitely like longer stories I like to tell or different things I'd like to explore in a longer format, not sort of like 1-2 punchline sort of thing. But I feel with those ones, as with any sort of longer piece of writing, you have to like take the time and plan it out and sort of get a structure going. And right now I'm running at such a frantic pace that it's hard to sort of sit down and look at the longer shape of a piece. So yeah, right now my brain is definitely got a short attention span when it comes to comic ideas. But I would like to. I'm hoping to like sit down and work on sort of a more coherent, longer piece with a narrative, not fictional. Like people often ask me, like, do you want to tell make up your own stories and tell your own stories? And my brain doesn't seem to tend towards that. Like it's a much more documentarian brain. So like even my Shakespeare comics, I'm taking something that already exists and communicating it in a different way. I'm not coming up with my own narrative and my own characters and situations and stuff. And my brain just tends towards more documentarian. But there are some fun or interesting nonfiction narratives that I would like to explore sometime.
Right. So talk to us a bit now. In all aspects of the definition, you are now a professional cartoonist because this is your job. So what, for those that are listening or watching, so definitely people check out goodticklebrain.com. I mean, right there you have, what I love about your website is that you have, a shop, you got t-shirts there, you got posters, your books are available on there as well. And also talk to people about from the business side of it. How what would be the recommendation you would give to cartoonists and people that are interested in kind of pursuing the direction you've taken, like from the trademark, not the trademark, but the branding perspective? What would be some advice that you would give to people?
Well, from like developing sort of a brand and a sort of personality of your comic, I think the point that we touched on earlier is finding something interesting that really interests and motivates you, and pursuing that. Like, so you make it's really hard and counterproductive, I think, to try and copy something that already exists out there. And I think that's often an instinct a lot of people have is, this comic is successful, I should do something like that. And that's a great way to sort of learn the flow of things. But I think if you really want to develop your own brand, it has to be entirely self-generative. It has to be your voice, your ideas, your story, your art style. And you can learn a lot by looking at other webcomics. I mean, I love reading all sorts of webcomics. But you can't copy. You have to sort of find your own voice. Because if you copy that, it'll be like, oh, that's just a knockoff XKCD or something like that. And that's not going to fly. So it really is about finding something that's unique about you that you can share. From a more practical point, it's not easy being a self-sustaining webcomic. So like it probably, you know, in the early days, like covering my basic costs, covering web hosting and you know, various online services, that was like a big accomplishment. Breaking even is a big accomplishment, and I'm lucky I have like a stable house over my head. I'm not going to get turned out into the street to starve, so I have a bit of a buffer that's allowed me to sort of experiment and work more on this than I would otherwise be able to. Um, so it's definitely like not easy, and there is luck involved in becoming a self-sustaining webcomic artist. But again, it's about finding your community and the people who are going to respond to your stuff. So with me and my Shakespeare comics, I started drawing the Shakespeare comics, and then suddenly it was like, oh, there are all these theaters out here who are performing Shakespeare and teaching Shakespeare. That's cool. Maybe they'd be interested in selling my comic books. So like I would send my comic books out to theater shops and be like, hey, would you like to stock these? And several of them said yes. And then, you know, it's like you get lucky and get one more step up the sort of the self-sufficiency ladder. And then you just kind of repeat. And then, you know, a lot of times you don't get up the ladder for a while, but you just have to keep trying and looking for opportunities in the community that, you know, your comic is landed in, and then see what happens. So, I mean, I've been very lucky. If you'd asked me 7 years ago if I would be where I'm at today, I'd be like, what? That sounds really silly. Don't be ridiculous. So yeah.
And also too, I think the other great thing about your work too is it's also educational. Like there's not like even to the point of all three titles, there's a level of education and advocacy and you know, learning about all of them as well. Was that deliberate, or is that just part of your personality in a way?
I think it must be part of my personality, because I don't think it was deliberate. I mean, with Shakespeare, you can see like the original comics are just very sort of like, this is something silly about Shakespeare that I like, and it was less structured towards educational. But then as I kept going, I was like, oh, you know what, the education is fun. Like I can frame things in a fun way, but also have it. I think it's a shift between originally writing in-joke comics to writing comics that could be appreciated by anybody, even if they didn't understand Shakespeare or weren't familiar with Shakespeare. And so now most of my comics, I write within the back of my head, like, okay, someone's never seen Hamlet before. Are they going to find this comic funny? You know, I don't always succeed, but that's always kind of in the back of my head. And I just think that that approach of never assuming that my reader is familiar with what I'm talking about, I think that naturally makes my comics more educational in tone. The Sketchy Beta ones, though, are just written for me and my climbing friends, so those are not quite as educational. I'll just go and say that. Yeah.
Well, for those, but the good thing is, you know, is that it does, for people that aren't familiar with the rock climbing culture, there is a presumption that the reader knows about it. So in a way, it's not talking down or making it seem inaccessible to people that aren't familiar with that work.
I hope not. It's really fun because I have friends who, you know, never read a Shakespeare play, don't know anything about Shakespeare comics, and they'll read my Shakespeare comics and be like, oh, okay, I kind of get that. I kind of see it. And then I have Shakespeare friends who've never touched a rock in their life read my rock climbing comics, and they're like, oh, I understand now what people who aren't familiar with Shakespeare, what their reaction is like reading, you know, being exposed to Shakespeare, because it's just like this is a world that I'm not familiar with, and I've suddenly been plunged into it, and I had to sort of figure out what the rules are. So it's fun hearing from people who aren't familiar with Shakespeare who read my Shakespeare comics, and then people who aren't familiar with rock climbing read my rock climbing comics, and just seeing what they get out of it, even though they're not part of that sort of community.
Right.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. This might be this is going to be a fun question. So a lot of the people that, some of the people I've interviewed, we talk about, you know, like people that like are some sci-fi writers and fantasy writers and stuff like that would talk about, you know, worlds and building worlds. So have you ever, or is there out of your three titles, have you ever thought about it? Is it in a kind of like shared universe? Like, are the characters in Sketchy Beta, can they stumble into be a common Musliman, or can be the characters there? Would they be walking past, in Good Tickle Brain? Have you thought of
Crossovers.
crossovers?
Not really. Yeah, because I feel like all these worlds are just very separate. So, like, if any of my Muslim friends wanted to go rock climbing with me, I'm sure we could come up with some good comics. But yeah, they're separate. I would say Good Tickle Brain is its own thing. It lives almost entirely in Shakespeare land.
Mhm.
And then Keep Calm and Muslimon and Sketchy Beta, and then the personal comics I do for Patreon, those are all the real world. So, they might intersect, but only if they happen to intersect in the real world.
Right.
So those all exist sort of in reality and then Shakespeare land. So those are pretty separate. But
Okay.
yeah.
But it'd be fun. Like, yeah. Well, then here's another deep question: are the characters in Good Tickle Brain, are those the actual characters, or are they actors portraying the characters? Because if they're actors portraying characters, you can actually then put in some Easter eggs there.
Yeah, it's been kind of fun because like right now I'm doing a complete adaptation of Hamlet. So basically I started at the beginning of Hamlet and I'm just working the way through. And sort of the baseline that I'm working from is like, this is Hamlet. This is actually Hamlet. This is his experiences through it. But, every now and then there is a sort of breaking of the fourth wall. So every time Hamlet has a soliloquy, he turns to the audience and says, "It's soliloquy time," which the actual Hamlet would not do. He would not acknowledge that he was making a soliloquy, but it's that breaking of the fourth wall that's kind of fun, to acknowledge that you're in a play, and you'd be like, okay, this scene is really silly, or why are we doing this again? So they're not quite actors playing characters, but they're characters with a certain degree of self-awareness that they are characters, I think is the way I would characterize it.
Right. Okay. All right. And so, do you see a finality to Good Tickle Brain, like the actual title itself? Do you see, all right, I'm going to do it for a couple more years, or like is there a point where do you want to keep going because you think this is going to always be exciting for you, or is there an idea where you're going to say, all right, I'm going to retire this title and move on to something else?
I mean, right now there's so much of Shakespeare that I have not addressed. There's so many plays that I haven't adapted. There's so many jokes that I haven't made that are on my running list of things to do. So, I mean, you could spend your whole life working on Shakespeare, and I could very happily spend the whole rest of my career working on Good Tickle Brain, as long as people are interested in it. And Shakespeare's lasted 450 years. I think maybe he's got a couple more in him. So I mean, that's definitely something that I could see doing indefinitely until I get bored of it, which I don't think I'll get bored of it. Certainly kept me entertained for most of my life. So yeah, that's kind of, and that's also something that's kind of scary, because when I'm drawing up sort of my to-do lists, I kind of look to the future, and it's just like, is this it? Is this the rest of my life stretching out in front of me? This entire just like line of just doing Shakespeare comics for the rest of my life? But it's not bad. It's if that is what the rest of my life contains, it's not bad. It's a lot of fun. I have a good time doing it. It's very gratifying. I think one of the things I like best about doing Good Tickle Brain is getting emails from teachers telling me that they're using their comics in the classrooms with their students, and it's just like makes me feel really, really good that my stuff is useful, entertaining, and helping people break down this barrier that there is to Shakespeare. And so, like right now, I'm okay with doing it indefinitely. Who knows? Ask me in a year, I might have completely changed my mind. But right now, I'm cool with it.
Is there when you look at that list of Shakespeare's works, is there some of those titles, some of those plays you're like, yeah, I'm not going to get to that one right now? Like, is there some that you're just like, everybody kind of has like their tops, but then is there some on there that maybe some Shakespearean people be listening to this will,
I mean, I'm definitely front loading the popular plays, the ones that everybody's familiar with or that everybody has to read in school and stuff like that, like Hamlet, Midsummer Night's Dream, Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet. I've definitely been like concentrating on those more just because, again, with my operating principle that I want to make this something that's engaging to people who aren't familiar with the source material. Those are the ones where you're most likely to get people, oh yeah, everyone knows basic plot, Romeo and Juliet, they can get this. I mean, am I going to do any like deep cuts on Measure for Measure and stuff like that? There's some great material there, and I would love to get to it someday. But like, it's not at the top of my list right now. It's like at some point, for sure. I would like to get through all the plays and give them all equal treatment, but I have to admit I'm working on the blockbusters right now.
Have you ever? Is there anything on your list too? Is to talk about like any of the other really popular, famous like public domain works as well?
Oh yeah, I mean like I would love to do like Sherlock Holmes comics or other classical literature comics, Iliad, Odyssey, Ramayana, Mahabharata. There's some great stuff out there. Journey to the West, Three Kingdoms. It's like if you look all around the world, there are these great sort of epic pieces of literature that would be really fun to engage with in a similar way as I'm engaging with Good Tickle Brain. And someday I might get there. But there's almost like too much choice out there. There's just so much stuff to play with, and you don't know what to play with first. So for the moment, I'm sticking with Shakespeare.
Well, and I said the benefit of doing it as a cartoonist, in a way, it's like the benefit of cartooning some of these classics is that you almost already have innate permission to do what you want with it because of the style of the art. Say for instance, if someone was doing like some very specific illustration with like, very highly detailed stuff, that's when you could start seeing some people are saying, well, that's not how it looked, or that's not how it's supposed to be. So the benefit you have of the style that you do is gives you a lot more freedom as well.
It's fun. I think one of the main, there's several advantages of stick figures. One of them is that they are this sort of blank slate. So I can draw Hamlet, and as long as he's holding up that little skull, no one's going to come back to me and say that's not Hamlet, because it's a stick figure. I mean, how much do you want? The other advantage of stick figures is that they're relatively fast to draw. So like talking to some other webcomic friends, and they'll spend hours doing one page, and within like 2 hours I can have a page done because just like it's fast. It's stick figures. You don't have to spend a lot of time on them. I mean, like, I try not to be a perfectionist, so you might see some of them times their eyeball sizes changes or the lines get a little wobbly. I'm just like, what? It's stick figures. Like the bar is really low. The expectations are low with stick figures, and that's a bar that I can clear. So
are you able to, some of that stuff you do, do you already have things drawn in advance? Like you have basically like a folder of all like Hamlet poses that you can just drag and drop in, or?
No, I have a little sort of like template figure of just like a blank stick figure with the head and the body so that I can get them all roughly the same size, because if I try to freehand draw them, they all end up slightly different sizes. And then sometimes if it's like a complicated figure, I might copy and paste and then just like change the eyebrows or something. But I try, and most of this stuff I just draw over and over each panel because it's stick figure. It didn't take that long to draw it twice. So again, right. Yeah.
And do you ever do any like commission work at all for people?
I've done some commission work, yeah. And I've got a couple things that I'm working on now. It's not a huge part of my business, but then I haven't been sort of actively soliciting it. It's something I'm interested in, but also I've got a lot of self-imposed tasks too, so I don't want to overwhelm myself on one plate or the other. So it's a bit of a balancing act.
And I do see like your shop over at goodticklebrain.com. You have, like I say, you have your books. Where do you get your T-shirts made? I love it, and you're wearing one of the T-shirts now.
Of course, I am. Self-promotion, right? Yeah. I used a local T-shirt shop just in my town. I like supporting local businesses, and this one prints all sorts of T-shirts and design. So I just went down there with my art file and be like, tell me how I make a T-shirt. And a guy sat down with me and was like, okay, these are the decisions you need to make. This is what we need from you. And then, hey, presto, I have a t-shirt. So again, it was very sort of just like zero knowledge, go out, try and find the knowledge, and then see what happens.
Wow. So these are probably you have these like in your, you have these sitting in your your own store then.
Yeah, they're in my attic, and like,
wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
little IKEA shelf. They're all stacked up in there.
Oh
Yeah.
wow. Okay. I love these t-shirts. They're amazing. Yeah. You have one that's like, it's just like the complete works of Shakespeare on there.
Yep, that's the one I'm wearing now.
Yeah. And then you have another one, which I think a lot of people would get a kick out of, is your Shakespearean insult t-shirt.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, some of Shakespeare's best insults, and he's got a lot of them.
Well, he invented so many words too.
Yeah.
So.
And invented or had the first recorded use of, which is not the same thing, but
that's true. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. all the language pedants out there are like, Shakespeare didn't invent that. He just had but yeah.
He wrote it down. As we always say, like, work emails. If you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. So, so this is so Mya, I tell you what's missing here on your shop, and this maybe you'll get mad because you probably don't have room in your attic. Coffee cups. Having a coffee cup with like some Shakespearean. Those college professors are walking around with a coffee cup.
I've had a lot of people suggest coffee cups to me, and I just haven't sort of figured out, because it's also like a big trade-off with any kind of merchandise. You have to think, okay, how much am I paying? How many pieces do I have to get? Because the rates get better the more pieces you order.
Right.
So if you just want 25 coffee cups, you're not going to be able to get much of a profit on it. So you have to figure out, like, how many do I have to order in order for it to be worthwhile? And then where am I going to start? And also, are people going to buy it? Like, every time you create a new piece of merchandise, you're kind of gambling that, okay, I'm putting this much money into it. I'm hoping that this many people buy it so I can get my money back and maybe make a bit more. So it's really a complicated economic consideration whenever you're doing new merch. So maybe someday I'll get to coffee cups, but right now it's just a bit too iffy for me.
Right. And I do appreciate what you said, though. You want to make sure that you're supporting local businesses, because there is this drop in where you can have them, like print on demand kind of deals that are made, far away. That's good.
Yeah. So like at some point, because, my t-shirts have been out for several years now, and sales of them have definitely slowed. And so economically, at some point, I probably will switch to print on demand. But again, I'd like to do that through my local t-shirt business, as opposed to, Cafe Press or one of these online conglomerates that just churn out designs. Right. So it's, if you do things thoughtfully, it takes a lot more effort than just like uploading your design to a website and clicking a button. But, I think it's worth the time and energy you put into thinking about those things.
Right. Good. So we're wrapping up the hour. So so tell people a bit. Also, Mya, you mentioned goodticklebrain.com is where people can come and see your website. You also have Instagram. You also have Twitter. You also have Tumblr. Are you still using Tumblr? Is that still?
Yep. I still got Tumblr. I'm Good Tickle Brain on all those platforms. I've tailed off on my Instagram game. I need to spike it up again. Each social media platform has its completely different personality, and you have to figure out how to fit into it. And Instagram is one. Like my climbing comic, I'm all there on Instagram, but Good Tickle Brain, I'm still working on that. So it's a journey. But yeah, Good Tickle Brain on all your friendly social media platforms.
And also check it out, Patreon, for people that do Patreon. Check out that at patreon.com /Good Tickle Brain.
Yep.
So perfect. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, man. This has been very entertaining, and I think for folks that have been listening to this, will get some pretty good advice on how to do professional cartooning.
Yeah, this has been really fun. Usually I just get asked to talk about Shakespeare stuff, so it's been fun to sort of talk about my other comics and about what it's like being a comic artist in general instead of just being a Shakespeare geek.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I got your name right too. I said Mya Gosling. So yeah.
Good job.
Yeah.
I always go through a thing where like I'd be introduced to people and they'd get it wrong, and then like I would wait too long to correct people, and it would get ingrained in their head, and then I'd be like, well, now it's too awkward. I can't correct it anymore.
Yeah.
So, or like the worst thing is like I'll meet people who I'm probably never going to see again, and then I end up like working with them, and I'm like, well, I didn't correct them the first time, so I guess this is my name now. Yeah.
This is who I am now.
Yep, this is who I am. All right, fine. But